What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get
Technology. Despite the avant-garde appearance, under the body hides quite traditional chassis BMW, not particularly different from the bogie predecessor in the body E38. The all-steel bodywork is complemented by aluminum front subframes, hood, and front fenders. So far, there are no aluminum cups, everything is steel, with the usual steel spars. The versions were designated as follows: E65, basic version, E66, extended, E67, armored. The B6 and B7 protected versions have reinforced suspension and brakes, and the armor is not superimposed, but uses new panels. In fact, the factory armored versions have their own body. There are more differences than between long and short versions. All body versions are strictly 4-door, but the interior can be either 5-seater or with 4 separate seats. And no folding rear seats. There is always a partition between the trunk and the cabin. Rear-wheel drive only. There are no all-wheel drive versions. There are a lot of motors, from inline 6s to V12, including exotic diesel V8. Transmission, of course, automatic, and one, strictly 6-speed ZF Series 6 HP. In this generation, before restyling, the minimum power of gasoline versions was 231 horsepower, diesel, 218 horsepower, but after restyling the power of gasoline inline 6 was already 258 horsepower, which is very upsetting for those who like to drive until the first breakdown. But those who own the car for a long time, taxes do not worry, because the maintenance of 7 usually costs much more than the transportation tax even for the version with V12. Suspension schemes, McPherson in front and multi-lever at the back. Most of the levers in this generation are already aluminum. Instead of torsions of stabilizers of transverse stability on the 7 used hydraulic actuators. Instead of springs on the rear axle, there can be an air suspension. And also the sedan has electronically adjustable shock absorbers. The interior is luxurious and beautiful. It is good by any standards, and even now the set of options looks good. And for all this to work properly, the electronics of the car is extremely complicated. 5 independent tires, including optical. And the number of electronic blocks is in tens. The 7 Series has a very large number of options, a high degree of integration of blocks. In addition, for the first time iDrive is used, which helps to configure part of all this happiness right on the move. And a little bit about the design. It is called Bangles, by the name of the main designer of the brand, though his subordinate Adrian van Hooijdonk drew the car mainly. Especially that Bangle made classic E46 and E38, but for some reason people forget about it. It's just that he initiated another change of brand's design and took responsibility for this experiment. The more recent F01 generation is, in my opinion, a logical continuation of the E65 in terms of design. It is a pity that the Bavarians did not immediately move to the design of LCI versions in E65. This is how BMW calls restyled models, abbreviating the term lifecycle impulse. Chronology: July 27, 2001. Start of production of new generation cars at the plant in Dingolfing. September 2001. At the IAA show in Frankfurt, the new 7 Series in E65-E66 bodywork is unveiled. The motors announced RM54B30 at 231 horsepower for the base 730i, N62B36 at 272 horsepower for the 735i, N62B44 at 333 horsepower for the 745i, N73B60 at 445 horsepower for the 760i, M57D30TU at 218 horsepower for the 730D, and M67D40TU at 258 horsepower for the 740D. All work in conjunction with a non-alternative 6-speed automatic transmission. November 2001. Sales of the short wheelbase version of the 735i 745i variants begin. Spring 2002. Sales of long wheelbase versions of E66 began. Diesel versions 730D, 740D also became available. July 2002. Sales of cars with 6-cylinder gasoline engines in 730i 730Li versions begin. April 2005. The restyled model, aka LCI, is presented. The design is noticeably simplified. Some of two extravagant elements are replaced. The front and rear parts of the car were significantly changed. iDrive control was improved. Electronic equipment was seriously revised. The engine lineup has been completely replaced. Version 730 I received a new motor N52B30 for 258 horsepower. 740 I received a motor N62B40 for 306 horsepower. 750 I received N62B48 for 367 horsepower and only 760i has the same N73B60 for 445 horsepower. The diesel motors also received changes. 730D changed the engine to M57D30 TU2 with an aluminum block, and under the hood of 740D appeared a motor M67D44 with a volume of 4.4 litres and an output of 329 horsepower. September 2008. Assembly of E65, E66 models is completed. Bodywork. Exterior panels cars of this class are usually well maintained over a long period of time, but in the case of the E65 things didn't work out so well. They were quickly removed from the garages of serious people, and they were operated without daily washes, warm garages and other delights of the rich life, which usually allow to keep the car in almost perfect condition until the end of the model. Despite the high quality of body painting, it is worthwhile to carefully inspect the body. After all, these sevens spent on the street for 15 years and more. In addition, the prices for such copies once dropped down to 200,000 rubles, and therefore the chances that the sedan was not cared for are quite high. However, if you look options at the bottom of the market, which is now about 300 to 350,000, it is rather silly to count on the ideal. In general, the main problem areas are the rear arches and trunk lid. Front fenders are aluminum, if they have not been changed to Taiwanese steel ones. On the original, corrosion is not noticeable, but there may be chips, and in case of damage to the fasteners, the fender is banal dangling. And it is clearly visible. The hood is also aluminum, and the outside is not chipped, but the inside is steel framed. You can often see how aluminum suffers at the joints of steel and aluminum parts. If the sealant on the edges swells, it is a bad sign, because the hood is quite an expensive part. The front edge of the roof is a traditional problem area, so inspect it very carefully. Otherwise, there may be accidental chips on the doors and just traces of careless operation, although the paintwork layer on the 7 is quite strong. Door apertures are well designed. There are no areas of moisture accumulation in them, and the seals do not collect dirt. Minimal number of problems is observed with moldings and bakotkas. There are no chips at door handles. In general, the representative class is felt. However, there are enough complicated cars. They are both repainted in wild colors, and covered with film, and simply unattended and not washed for years. And believe me, you do not need such cars, because if the body is not in order, the rest of the problems will be even more. Bottom. The age of the car is much more noticeable from underneath, so it's best not to buy an E65 without an inspection on an elevator. If you notice rust on the arches from the outside, don't hesitate to bend off the wet pile lockers. Almost certainly the damage to the rear arch will be extensive. Not necessarily with through corrosion of the inner arch, but clearly with loose rust. And the joint with the sill can rot through, because the construction here is extremely dirt-averse. The outer plastic sill is supported by a long outer stiffener with many windows for fasteners. At the front, the stiffener box has a window in the front fender recess, where dirt accumulates under the locker. As a result, it is always present inside this element, and it can be washed only with partial disassembly of the car. In turn, this leads to corrosion of the middle lower part of the side wall, which is the main part of the sill, and accumulation of dirt already in the inner body cavity. The fuel filler pipes are routed in the right rear arch, and behind them the arch is corroded due to dirt accumulation. The sill itself in its visible lower part is usually intact. It is well painted and anti-gravelled. The floors of the body outside are also usually in good condition from the front and up to the middle pillars, if there were no leaks. In the cabin, which happens on this generation. But in the rear, above the rear subframe and fuel tank, most cars start to have an area of extensive surface corrosion. Very seldom owners bother with full antica with removal of suspension and tank, but the bottom covered with black antica often hides. The worst scenario, when anti-gravel is applied over the rust. In the front arches, the situation is usually better. Neither the cup nor the fender shelf does not suffer, and small pockets of corrosion on the fasteners and behind the suspension strut are not something critical. Corrosion of the front subframe is an extremely unpleasant thing, although it is not too expensive. Usually it costs within 5 to 20,000 rubles even now. Note that the car has a rather flimsy exhaust system thermal shield, which often literally falls apart. And also the 7 has a surprisingly small center tunnel, which for some reason has swollen seams. Special attention should be paid to the floor of the body from the inside, because wet floors on the E65 are not only a bodywork problem. With so many electronics, it greatly affects the number of failures of onboard systems. Mostly leaks banal from doors, so you need to check drains and reglue seals, tighten the plastic nuts fixing the inner door panel. The situation is also complicated by unsuccessful interior drains. They are heavily clogged with floor carpet material. In addition to the doors, it is worth checking and drains of the hatch. They are clogged often and quickly. Water also gets from the engine compartment into the passenger compartment through the climate control system, because of an extremely unsuccessful valve in the electronics niche, which is often clogged. It should be removed immediately, if you do not want to flood the wiring of the engine blocks. Drainage of the cabin filter should also be checked. It is so arranged that water gets into it often, and in the absence of drainage. It will also go into the cabin, so do not be lazy to check first of all the air duct from the right windshield wiper to the engine panel. Sometimes you will need a high-pressure washer for penetration, and to avoid such problems in the future, it is worth removing the pedal drain valve in the left air duct. It is often clogged there too. Optics. The cars came standard with running lights in the form of angel eyes, which by now have already burned out. In addition, the glass is very badly rubbed, and the inside of the headlight is hot. Because of this the wiring is cracked. Headlights sometimes get dusty inside due to unsuccessful ventilation. Repair of E65 optics is usually expensive, because the design is much more complicated than the average hospital, and the headlights are assembled on sealant, which complicates their disassembly. Interior. Door handles with a comfort access system cause a lot of trouble. Their sensors break regularly, but they are inexpensive and can even be repaired. Locks and closes are surprisingly trouble-free. And even window lifters here are strong, despite the fact that the design with a cable by 10 to 15 years usually requires its replacement. As a rule, the tips fall apart from old age. In services they are recrimped or put small clamps, but sometimes, because of failures of the system to prevent clamping and excessive tension. Most often their failures are purely programmatic, from a series of coded hood cables sour very early. It is recommended to lubricate them and replace them with new ones if they start to stick. It is very expensive to open the hood, almost with the removal of the front suspension. At least you need to remove the wheel, wash a reservoir, and make a special long grip in order to get to the lock. The hatch is relatively trouble-free. You only need to clean the drains and occasionally lubricate the guides. But squeaking will make you do this long before the motor starts to die. There are 4 sunroof drains in the car. The rear ones are often forgotten. It is possible to enumerate specifics for a long time. Everything individually seems to be reliable, but there are too many things. In 7, and it is made very cleverly. It is much more complicated than one can assume from experience with any other cars. Actually, it will be difficult to adjust the doors evenly, because the construction of any lock is more serious than the gearbox on. Jiggularly, and they sometimes break, as well as door closes. Even the glove box lock is so intricately arranged that it has a cable drive, which sometimes comes off, and the box is blocked. However, the owners do not complain, because all this costs conditionally inexpensive and does not cause much trouble. Much more money owners of 7s spend on changing the appearance, pre-styled to restyled, for example. Electrics. One E65 A66 series car is enough for a car service electrician to provide for a family and not need anything. Because the owner cannot do without an electrician, and the work requires very qualified. In this respect E65 is much closer to modern BMW than to its ancestor. Let's add here wonderful generators with water cooling on N62 engine and a great number of owners, who need to shove more options from restyle and richer version into the car. There is a lot to shove here, from door closers to active cruise, antennas, navigation, and active headrests with screens. Electrics present many problems that will not let you start the engine. On all cars with V8 integrated power module IVM will not start on hot. You need to solder the board. Otherwise, problems with power supply of ECU, valvetronic, and gearbox are ensured. A typical fault of the SBSR gasoline pump power supply unit is a broken soldering of the choke. But the transistor often hangs on snot. Therefore, the gasoline pump is often connected through a relay, unloading the block, so that the car somehow worked, or directly. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. There are dozens, if not hundreds of reasons for failures or emergency modes of operation. The car is famous for caprices of its electrical systems. Valvetronic motors with problematic gearboxes, pinion in the gearbox of electric handbrake, parktronic sensors, shock absorbers, and stabilizers, antennas of keyless access and Webasto, iDrive, and all its subsystems fail. Any failure leads to a chain of errors on blocks with unpredictable consequences. However, the sect of BMW diagnosticians usually knows how to use proprietary software and knows cause and effect relations, so there are no unsolvable problems. Frequently breaking elements are available from Chinese craftsmen, reconditioned or imported second-hand from regions with gentler operating conditions. Intermediate result. The car is not very beautiful from the outside, but it pays off with a luxurious interior and a wide range of options. And it is still very good on the move. But only in some places 7 is frankly old, and reliability of its most complicated technical solutions cannot resist time and aspiration of former owners to save on service, which eventually results in expensive repairs. However, despite the long list of potential problems, this generation of the 7 doesn't look like a terrible buy yet, right? But we haven't touched on the mechanicals of the E65 yet: suspensions, motors, and transmissions. Do they leave a hope for happiness from purchase, or they too will demand constant and rather large-scale financial investments? In this we will understand in the second part of this article of the BMW 7 Series. In conclusion, the BMW 7 Series 4, particularly the E65 and E66 models, presents a fascinating case study of luxury and longevity. While these vehicles boast impressive engineering and performance, their history often reveals a troubling narrative of neglect and poor ownership. With high mileage and questionable maintenance practices, many of these cars have fallen into the hands of less than caring owners, leading to a range of issues that can be daunting for potential buyers. However, skilled servicemen can breathe new life into these machines, showcasing the importance of proper care and attention. Ultimately, the E65 and D66 serve as a reminder that while luxury cars can offer an exhilarating driving experience, their true value lies in the commitment to maintenance and responsible ownership.